It is good to see everyone tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll go ahead and get started. Just a few prayer requests, and then we'll jump into it. It says Hazel Eanes requests prayers for her cousin Curtis Thomason. Curtis is battling cancer. That's Curtis Thomason. Lynn Fan, the daughter of Connie Dillard, was admitted to the hospital. She is suffering from dehydration as well as heart issues. So that's Lynn Fan. And then Ed Sims, the uncle of Eric Sims, passed away October 19th. His funeral will be on October 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Thomas Funeral Service at a Thomas Funeral Home. So, any other prayer requests? All right, and I just wanted to thank everyone who helped out with the Fall Festival this past Sunday. I know there are so many of you, who helped set out tables and cook food and organize games and work the games, and I appreciate all your help. So thank you so much. Thank you for who did it. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll get started. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we bow before you right now. We praise and honor you. We thank you for being so good to us. And right now we come to you with heavy hearts because we know there are people in our congregation who are hurting, people who are dealing with sicknesses and loss. Right now we pray for Curtis Thomason as she is battling cancer. Pray for Lynn Fan as she was admitted to the hospital and suffering from dehydration, and be with the Sims family with the passing of Ed. We just pray for those right now, God. Pray that you give comfort and healing, that you'll be with those who are trying to recover. And most of all, thank you for your Son, who gives us ultimate hope. And we know that this life is not all there is. And we have hope of the resurrection. Help us as when we leave here, to be your salt and light, and to take your message and your good news to those around us. It's in your Son's name. Amen. All right. So we are, I don't know why, actually, I shouldn't have done that. It has the 8 up there because this is the 8th lesson. So that's what that's about. We're not in Romans chapter 8. It's just the 8th lesson of the series. That's how I title my lessons. So just a super quick review. We're in Romans chapter 3. So it says this, it says, "What then? Are the Jews any better off? No, not at all. For we have already charged that all, both Jews and Greeks, are under sin. As it is written, none is righteous, no, not one." And so what Paul does, chapter 1, the Gentiles are guilty. Chapter 2, the Jews are guilty. Those who have tried to live a moral life, even they are guilty. Everyone is for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. He wants to make sure that no one feels as if they are left off. And one of the things that we looked at last week was a picture of a turtle on a fence post, if you remember that picture. And when you see a turtle on a tall, slender fence post, you don't think to yourself, man, that turtle must really be a good jumper to jump up there. That turtle must have just been able to be like Spider-Man and just climbed up that slick fence post all by himself. The only way that turtle was able to get on top of that fence post is if someone placed him there. And that's the imagery that kind of stuck in my mind. The only way that we will get to be with God is not through our effort or our ability, but as if God takes us in his hand and brings us to him. And which he did when he sent his Son to die on the cross. And so this is kind of the imagery that that comes to my mind when I read verses like this. And so Paul says it like this. He says, but now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Although the law and the prophets bear witness to it, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe, for there is no distinction. And I think what Paul is doing here is he has something to say both to the Jews and to the Gentiles. Because the Jews, what do they think? They think their righteousness comes from where? From following the law, from their heritage, right? And he says that the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. He's telling the Jews, hey, your righteousness is not coming from following the law. But then he also has something to say to the Gentiles. He says to the Gentiles, he says that you receive this righteousness how? Through faith. Because the Jews thought they received righteousness by following the law. The Gentiles, they're coming from a pagan background, and the way that you earned favor from your gods was what? Was trying to please them and to placate them. Trying to win their favor by giving them a bunch of gifts. And if you keep bribing them, then maybe they'll kind of take a liking to you, and maybe they'll bless you and throw you a few crumbs your way every once in a while. And so Paul, he says this, he says, righteousness, it comes apart from the law, and it comes through faith. There's nothing that you do that you have to earn it or deserve it. This was the problem. Both the Jews and the Gentiles had a theological dysfunction when it came to their belief about God. Each one of them took God and made God in their own image and formed and shaped God to fit their thoughts and their standards and their beliefs and upbringing. But do we ever do that also? Do we ever take God and put him in a box and try to form and shape God to fit our beliefs or our understandings? There's a quote in a magazine called Parade Magazine, and it was a quote by Elton John. And he said this, he said, I think Jesus was a compassionate, super intelligent gay man who understood the human problem. This is who Elton John thought that Jesus was. A super intelligent gay man who understands the human problem. It's pretty easy to see how Elton John, he took God and formed him and shaped him in his image. I'm just curious, in what ways do you think we make God in our own image? And so we have Robert with a microphone also. So if you're kind of on this side, Robert might get you. And if you're kind of closer to me, I might get you. But what ways do we put God in a box? Or do we make God in our own image? Which way are you going to go, Robert? It's coming from behind you.
Oh, I got to do it that way? Oh, can you hear me? So I guess the first thing that came to mind, TJ, was that I think we, in our thinking or whatever, we put the same physical limitations on God that we have relative to what we're capable of or how much we can do or how much patience or whatever it is that we think we have from a physical standpoint or mental standpoint. I think because that's all we understand, it limits our ability to think of really how God is, and we put him in that box of the same thing, the same limitations that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen.
And I think sometimes we put God in the box that our parents gave us without rightly dividing the word. for ourselves or with bouncing it off other people. I think that's a big deal too.
Yeah.
It's this box that our parents and predecessors put us in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you grow up with traditions or just certain beliefs, and well, that's what my parents believed and my grandparents. So this is just the way it is.
So that's how God's got to be.
Yeah, that's how God has to be. Yeah. Yeah, is there one over here?
Made in his image with a soul.
Yeah,
He gave us a soul.
yeah. Genesis 1:27.
How do you put that soul in a box?
What's that?
How do you put the soul in a box?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, John chapter 4 and verse 24 says, right? God is spirit. You know. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I think a lot of times we expect God to see things the same way we do. We forget that He sees all of time at one time instead of it's not linear thinking. And he sees things that we don't see because we're so temporal and He is not.
Yeah. Yes. That's so good. I mean, this would go to the wisdom of God, right? He sees the beginning from the end, and He knows how things are going to turn out, and sometimes things.
Big picture where we can only see one piece.
Right.
And He sees all.
Yeah, He sees the big picture. We only see one small piece, and I mean, there's things that God might do right over here that literally may not have an effect that you may not even see for 300 years from now. You just have no idea. You have no idea how things interact with each other. I mean, there's some scientists and I believe physicists who call this the butterfly effect. If you've heard of this before, a butterfly flapping its wings in Africa can cause a tsunami, in another part of the world. Just how there's this, cascading effect of things that can happen. And, you knock over one domino over here and you just don't know what's going to happen. But God sees all of that. And He can organize and orchestrate all of world history to bring about His purposes. And we just have no idea.
We think about the pebble dropped in the pond, and we see the ripples. As humans, we see the ripples on the surface, but we forget there's ripples up under the water as well.
So good. So good. Anybody else? How do we make God in our image? Some of y'all probably heard this illustration. Thomas Jefferson, right? What did he do with God's Word? He took God's Word and he took a Bible and he went through the Gospels. He cut out the sayings and the passages that he liked, and he pasted them into a new booklet, and he called it, what did he call it? He called it The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. He believed that, God kind of set the world up, and he kind of stood back, and God's kind of aloof and not active and present in the world. And so Thomas Jefferson, he took out every mention of miracles in the Bible. He put in the fact that Jesus died on the cross, but he took out His resurrection. And so, there's a great example of a person who literally took God and made Him in His own image. He made His own Bible to fit what he thought about God. Yes, yeah.
I think sometimes we rationalize the words of the Bible. For instance, this was just an example that came to mind, but maybe a family wants to take their kids camping and they're going to be out all weekend. Do they go on into church? Well, I think the Lord would understand us wanting to be together. I think we rationalize His Word, and that's the way we kind of bring Him around, you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it's so. I don't know about you, but I'm so good at rationalizing the things that I want to do, right? Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, Jack. Robert's coming to you.
Many times
It seems to me that we have taken the Bible and the church and put it with our culture and made this American. If you go in other parts of the world and do mission work, oftentimes those other countries, Jamaica, I've been in Jamaica many times, Thailand, different places, they look at us, okay, we're reading the Bible, but this is the American version. And if you're in Thailand and you're a Buddhist country, if we watch them, they have a little bit of Buddhist culture in that. And so we can make God in our own image. We do make God in some ways American
Yeah.
in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that where we got the American Standard?
What's that, Harold?
The American Standard version?
Oh, yeah, the ASV, yeah. American Standard. Yeah, gotcha. Oh, man. So, yeah. I think this happens, right? I don't know about you, but I see some people who are just really seem like they're angry individuals. And whenever they talk about God, how do they see God? As kind of an angry God who's looking just to punish people. And I see people who kind of want to go out and sin and live their life the way that they want to. And how do they view God? They kind of view God like a God who's he just is a God of love and grace, and it's okay. It's not that big of a deal. Right? I think we see this all the time in so many different bobblehead Jesus. Where what he's just always,
Hey, Jesus, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Oh, yeah, that's okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Hey, Jesus, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And he just, yeah, okay. Just always bobbing his head, isn't he? Yeah, that's good. That's good. So the text continues on. It says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. This phrase, well, let me ask this question. What does it, how do we fall short of the glory of God? What does that phrase mean, to fall short of the glory of God?
We'd have to know what makes God glorious in the first place.
Oh, say that again, because that was really good.
You'd have to understand and know what makes God glorious in the first place to know how we could possibly fall short.
Yeah, that's good. What God intended us to do. So we're not doing what God intended us to do, and thereby we are falling short of the glory of God. Yeah.
When we fall short of the glory of God, I think about we're not perfect, and God is perfect.
Yeah. So God is perfect. He's up here. We're not perfect. Falling short. Yeah. Anybody else?
And then a definition of sin is to miss the mark. You shoot an arrow at the target, but you don't pull the bow quite far enough, and so the arrow falls short of the target. You've missed the target. You've sinned. And no matter what effort we put out, we can never pull that bow strong enough to become godlike in our ability to act and live and think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's so good. So good. This word fall short means, what does it mean? It means to lag behind, to be late, to not be able to keep up. To lag behind, be late, not able to keep up. So I remember when I was in kindergarten, we had two reading groups. We had the rabbits and the tortoises. I was not in the rabbit group. I was in the tortoise group. Guess which group that was? I was not a very good reader growing up. I remember we had to buy the Hooked on Phonics. We did the whole thing. And, I was trying to read and to keep up, and I just could not read fast enough. I just couldn't keep up with what everybody else was doing. I just wasn't good enough with it. And I remember when I was a youth minister, we would go to wilderness trek. And we were climbing these 14,000-foot mountains. And we're trying to do this thing. And I remember one time the guide, he was going to run ahead and look at something, and I said, "Oh, I'll go with you. You know, I'm the adult leader of the, you know, in this thing. I'll go with you." This is, you know, some young kid, you know, who's in college, and he's been doing this all summer long, and he's like, "All right." And so he like just sprints up this mountain. I think he was half mountain goat or something. I mean, he was just like bounding up somehow, and I mean, he was running up this mountain like he was like flat ground or something. And I mean, I got winded very quickly, and also I just didn't have the stable footing that he had somehow, and I just couldn't keep up with him. And then I think about how Jesus tells us, he says, to follow in his footsteps, to follow after him, to be his disciple, to do as he did. And as we're living life and we're walking with Jesus, Jesus is walking ahead of us, and we're supposed to be following him. And what do I keep doing? You know, I keep stumbling and following, and I just can't keep up with Jesus. I keep lagging behind.
Can't match him stride for stride.
I cannot match him stride for stride. Like you said, I just don't have the power to do it.
Don't have the reach.
Don't have the reach. And I mean, we could talk a lot about what it means to fall short, but this is one of the things that it means to fall short. Is like, I just can't do it on my own. I can't keep up. You know, I'm supposed to be following in his footsteps, and I just can't reach them, mostly because I keep stumbling over my own feet. And I keep just falling down and stubbing my toes and skinning my knees. You know, Paul tells us, I think one of the reasons he's telling them this is because it's so easy to fall into the comparison trap, where we're looking at ourselves and looking at others, and we're almost comparing our holiness to someone else's holiness, and how we measure up and how good we're doing. But it doesn't matter how holy we think we are or how much we stack up, but our holiness that stacks up, it only amounts to a hill of beans compared to the mountainous glory of God. I ran across this quote that I really liked. It said, the harlot, the liar, the murderer are short of God's glory, but so are you. Perhaps they stand at the bottom of a mine, and you on the crest of an Alp. Think about how big of a difference that is, the bottom of a mine and the crest of an Alp. But you are as little able to touch the stars as they. You both have about the same chance. Both fall short. You can't do it. And so we're all on the same playing field. Verse 24 says this. It says, "Are you?" And this is something I got to give credit. This is something Jake Ingalls pointed out to me, and so he wanted me to share this. Verse 24 says, "Are you justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus?" John chapter 15 and verse 25 says this. It says, "But the word that is written in their law must be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause." This word "without a cause" is the word. It's the word "gift" in Greek. Their gift to Jesus was hatred. Their gift to Jesus was spitting on him. Their gift to Jesus was flogging him and putting a crown of thorns on him. Their gift to Jesus was nailing him on a cross. I mean, that is the exact word there, "without a cause." It was their gift. And then Jesus says, "This is what you gifted me: hatred and spit upon and a cross. And I'm going to turn around and I'm going to gift you redemption that's in Christ Jesus." Isn't that beautiful? this is what you gave me without cause, and I didn't deserve it, I didn't earn it, and you didn't deserve it, and you didn't earn it, but I'm going to give you redemption. I mean, what a beautiful illustration that is. I mean, wow. Wow. And so here's a summary so far of kind of where we've been. I don't know if you can, it's not as big as I wanted it to be, but it says this. It says, a righteousness of God through faith. Who for? For all who believe. Really? Why? Because there's no Jew or Gentile distinction. Why not? Because all have sinned and fallen short. So what's the solution? Being justified as a gift of grace. And so this is kind of the conversation that's being had back and forth in these passages. And then moving on to verse 25, it says this. It says, whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance he has passed over former sins. It says that, what does it say there? It says, this was to show God's righteousness, because in his divine forbearance he passed over former sins. He says he had to punish Jesus because God is righteousness, and in the past he passed over former sins. Why is it that a righteous God cannot pass over sins? I mean, this is the argument that Paul is making here. He's saying the reason that Jesus had to die on the cross was to show his righteousness. He showed his righteousness because in the past he was not showing his righteousness, because in the past he passed over sins. So why is it that God, being righteous, is not able to pass over sins? He's a God of justice. This is the argument that Paul is making. So why is that? Anybody? I think you're right. It has to do with God's justice, for sure. Because here's the illustration. Here's the problem. I could just see in the Old Testament, God is speaking with Moses face to face. And I could see that it says that Enoch was no more because he walked with God and he was assumed up into heaven. And so was Elijah, just taken up into heaven. And I could see Satan going up to God and saying, God, this is what Satan means, right? It means accuser. And this is what he does. And so he accuses God. He says, God, you say that you're righteous. You say that you're holy, but you talk with Moses face to face. You take Enoch and you brought him straight up into heaven, and you took Elijah straight up into heaven. You say that you're righteous, but you're lying. You can't be righteous and do those things. And what does God say? He says, wait and see. And then you read in Leviticus chapter 5 in verse 10, it says, then he shall offer the second for a burnt offering according to the rule, and the priest shall make atonement for him for the sin that he has committed, and he shall be forgiven. And so they make a sacrifice of a little dove or a little pigeon or a little lamb. And Satan goes up to God and says, God, you say that you're righteous, but this little lamb, this lamb is supposed to take away their sin. Are you serious? That lamb can't take away their sin. You say that you're righteous, but you're lying. You're a fake. You're a phony. And what does God say? Just wait and see. And then we read in Revelation chapter 8, or Revelation chapter 13, verse 8. It says, "And all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who was slain." And so before the foundation of the world, God had a book. And what was the name of the book? The book of the life of the Lamb who was slain. Before the foundation of the world, there was a book with your name written on it, and it was called the book of the life of the Lamb who was slain. Since before creation, God knew that He was going to send His Son, and that His Son was going to be slain. I remember, I don't remember, this didn't actually happen, so I don't remember it, but just imagine you're settling in for the night, and you're kind of, you're settling in, and you hear a knock at your door. And it's maybe a friend you haven't seen in a long time. Someone, just an acquaintance that you don't even know very much. And they come and say, we just lost our house from a fire, and things are going really hard and really tough. And me, my wife, and my 3 kids right here, we're really hungry. We're just looking for some food. And you say, I really don't have anything in our house tonight, but I know the owner of the grocery store just down the road, and I'll call him up, and I'll tell him that you're coming, and you just get whatever food that you want, and I'll take care of the bill later. Now, did those people, were they able to partake of the benefit of the food before the food was even paid for? Yeah, they were, because they went to the store and they just got the food. And they were able to get the food because the guy knew the owner, and the guy called up there and says, hey, I'll take care of it later. Right? I mean, they got the food. They ate the food. And the next day the guy goes up and says, all right, what's the bill? Let me pay for it. And this is exactly what's going on in the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, Satan is accusing God and saying, you're not being righteous. You're not punishing sin. You're not taking sin seriously. You're not being just. But what did God know? Since the foundation of the world, that there was a book called The Life of the Lamb that was slain. He knew that He was going to send His Son. And so people, even in the Old Testament, could partake of the benefits of the price that was going to be paid, even though it had not yet been paid. Just as the people were able to eat the food from the grocery store, even though the bill was going to be paid later. Because God is holy, because God is just, sin has to be punished. He's a holy and a righteous God. And Satan is saying, you're not being fair, you're not being righteous. And God says, just wait and see. Because Satan never would have thought that the same God who was judging humanity would also be the same God who would get off of His judgment seat and go down and take the punishment for the people. But this is what God did. He pronounces punishment, and then He takes on the judgment for Himself. And this is what this is what verse 25 was saying. By Jesus dying on the cross, it was to show that God was righteous, that He is holy, that sin is a big deal, and sin deserves to be punished. This is what's going on, because in the past He had passed over former sins. And I think this is interesting. This is a side note, but I think this kind of makes sense of this really interesting verse in Jude chapter 9. It says, "But when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment, but said, 'The Lord rebuke you.'" I mean, this is the only verse we have about, like, you read that verse, you go, what in the world is going on there? That don't even make any sense. That's a head scratcher. But it seems what you have going on is so Moses dies, and God sends the archangel Michael to go and to take the body of Moses, and he goes over there, and as he's getting ready to take him, who else shows up? It's Satan. And so they're fighting about the body. And Satan says, "This body belongs to me." And the archangel is saying, "No, I got to take this body to God." Why are they fighting about the body? Because apparently Satan thought that he had claim to the body.
Well, he wanted to set Moses up as a god in himself.
Oh, he wanted to set Moses up as a god in himself, right? I mean, this is so like, hey, look, this guy who you thought was a great leader, he belongs to me. He's mine. Because was Moses a sinner? Yeah, you bet he was. But the archangel Michael, what does he do? He takes the body and Satan says, "That's not fair. He's a sinner. He belongs to me." And I could just see the archangel Michael saying, "Just wait and see." Because God does come and he takes care of it. Even Moses got to receive the blessings of Jesus, who came 1,400 years later, even back then. So I just thought I think that's kind of what's going on in Jude chapter 9, which I think is interesting right there. So moving on. All right. Okay. So here we go. Verse 26 says this. "It was to show his righteousness at the present time, so that he might be the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus." So we're talking about Jesus dying on the cross. So my question is how does Jesus dying on the cross, how does that save us? Through his blood. Through his blood. There had to be a sacrifice. There had to be a sacrifice. A perfect sacrifice. A perfect willing sacrifice.
And an unblemished.
Just keep adding the adjectives.
Non-sinful.
A non-sinful, unblemished, perfect, willing sacrifice that shed his blood.
In the day you eat of, you shall surely die. We all have eaten of that fruit. We're all deserving of death.
Yeah.
But Jesus never sinned. Yeah. He was never deserving of death.
Yeah.
Therefore, the grave had no power to hold him. And if we believe in that, and that's God's plan for us, then we can become partakers by being baptized and buried with him in baptism into his death. We then become the beneficiary of his sinless sacrifice to cover our sin for us.
Yeah. So good. So many times, and I get it, and I don't think it's necessarily wrong, but we talk about the cross, and we go, man, look, he got whipped. And think about just being lashed in the back. He got the crown of thorns on his head, and he got pushed down, and he's bleeding. And he had to carry his cross. And then he had to hang on the cross and get the nails in his hands and in his feet. And he's up on the cross, and he's suffocating, and he's pushing himself up to be able to breathe. And then he slumps back down, and you die of asphyxiation. You die. And so many times, I think we focus on the physical side of the cross. But Jesus suffering physically has nothing to do with your salvation. Jesus dying on a literal cross had nothing to do with your salvation. That wasn't the point of it. It could have been some other way he died. It had to be a sacrifice, right? It didn't have to be dying on a cross, though. And then, Jesus is in the garden, and what is he? I mean, he is sweating profusely. He's sweating like drops of blood, and what does he pray? May this cup pass from me. And then, but he says, not my will, but your will be done. But think about that. I mean, why is it that Jesus doesn't want to go through this? Well, yeah, he's human, but you read about people all throughout church history who were happy to be martyred for Jesus. I mean, after this is true, right? But I mean, Jesus, he knew what was going to happen, right? I mean, he knew he was going to be, right? I mean, you have people who were burned alive, who were torn up by lions, who were stuck and used as torches to torch people's gardens. There's a quote right here. It says, one person in India, as they were being skinned alive, said this to their persecutor, "Thank you for this. Tear off my old garment, and I will soon put on Christ's garment of righteousness." And then Christopher Love's wife wrote to him. He was another martyr. She said, "Today you will dress yourself in your spiritual garment. Today they will sever you from your physical head, but they cannot sever you from your spiritual head, Christ." And as he went to the gallows with his wife applauding him and him singing about glory. And so you have all these Christians throughout church history who were singing as they were being skinned alive and burned. And was Jesus more of a wimp than them? Certainly not. And I say this to say, like, what's going on in here? It's the very words of Jesus. It's what he talks about. The words he says is, "Let this cup pass from me." So what's the cup? Is the cup the crucifixion? No, that's not it at all. That's not the cup he's talking about. The cup is talked about all throughout the Old Testament. In let's see, I got it right here. In Isaiah chapter 51, it talks about the cup that is full of God's wrath. In Jeremiah chapter 25 and verse 15, it talks about the cup that is filled with the wine of God's wrath. In Revelation chapter 16 and verse 19, it is the cup of the wine of the fury of God's wrath. The cup of the wine of the fury of God's wrath. This is what Jesus was so worried about. This is what the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross was all about. It was not about physical suffering. That was not the bad part, even though we know how bad that was. It was Jesus who took God's wrath of sin, and he took that wrath that was due to everyone on planet Earth who ever has lived and is living and will live, and all of that wrath for all of humanity was poured out on Jesus at the cross. That's what Jesus was worried about. That's what Jesus didn't want to endure, was experiencing God's wrath. Some have said that the reason God turned is because he could not bear to see the soldiers and the crowd spitting and mocking and beating on Jesus. But that's not why God turned away. God turned away because he saw your sin on his Son. That's why God turned away. And so it is as if, and we'll finish with this. I think unless there's any final comments, I guess. So, but it's as if you are standing in front of a dam that is 10,000 miles wide and 10,000 miles tall and is filled with boiling hot water. And that dam starts to crack and it starts to break, and all of those billions and even trillions of gallons of water are getting ready to rush upon you and are getting ready to obliterate you. And at the last minute, someone steps in the way and takes you and brings you out to safety, and they take every single bit of that punishment all on themselves. And it was after that Jesus got done drinking the very last drop of God's wrath, he turned the cup over and said, "It is finished." This is what was so bad about Jesus dying on the cross. But it's because of that sacrifice then that we get to be with Jesus, and that God is still righteous and he can look past our sin. We'll finish there, but any final thoughts, comments, or questions or statements before we wrap up? Yes.
I just want to say you gave us a really clear picture. I think a lot of times we talk about it very generally, but you were very specific about it, and it was very clear what Jesus really did for us.
Yeah. All right, we will end there for tonight. Thank y'all so much. I appreciate it.